he was alone with his grief. Then an Apache woman brought fire, silence, and something like grace. Ethan sat alone in the small observation chamber of the Mars colony, staring at the endless red plains stretching beyond the reinforced glass. The wind outside howled across the barren landscape, raising clouds of iron-rich dust that painted the horizon in moving shades of orange and rust. Everything around him was quiet, too quiet. Even the hum of the life support system sounded distant, as if it were part of a dream he could not fully wake from. He had not left this room for hours. Not since he had gone back to the living quarters, touched the empty beds, and felt the echo of absence in every corner. The colony had once been full of laughter and chatter, a small, hopeful pocket of human life on a hostile planet. Now it felt more like a graveyard, inhabited by those who had survived but had lost pieces of themselves in the disaster that had struck months ago. Ethan had lost everything, his wife, his child. The fire that had taken them had also burned away his reason to continue. He moved like a ghost through the halls of the colony, performing tasks because he had to, not because he wanted to. Food rations, water filtration, oxygen levels, machines that hummed, beeped, and occasionally groaned as if they too felt the weight of despair. Tonight, as he sat by the observation window, a faint signal flickered across the control panel. It was weak and inconsistent, barely distinguishable from the electronic noise that always buzzed through the colony's systems. Ethan frowned. Normally, signals came from satellites or the automated drones surveying the terrain. But this one, it felt different. Personal, somehow. Almost human. Curiosity tugged at him, a long-forgotten thread of feeling. For the first time in weeks, Ethan stood up. His boots crunched softly on the metal floor as he made his way to the main control room. The signal grew stronger as he approached. It was coming from the canyon that stretched several kilometers to the east of the colony, a jagged wound in the Martian surface, carved by eons of wind and erosion. He checked his suit, making sure oxygen levels were optimal and tools were within reach. The cold was brutal, even inside the pressurized sections, and outside it was deadly. But something in Ethan urged him forward. He did know if there was another human alive, another soul he could recognize, perhaps someone who had survived in secret. He needed somehow a sign that humanity was still more than a memory on this planet. The canyon loomed ahead as he stepped out of the airlock. The sun had begun to dip below the horizon, casting long, jagged shadows that made the red rock appear almost black. Dust swirled in violent little storms, and every step was a challenge. But Ethan pushed onward, following the signal with painstaking care. He used his suit's scanner to navigate through the rough terrain, marking each crevice and ridge. Hours passed. The canyon grew deeper, the walls taller and more forbidding. Every sound was amplified, his own breath, the crunch of dust underfoot, the distant hiss of shifting wind. Yet amid this oppressive quiet, the signal pulsed steadily, a tiny heartbeat calling him forward. And then, as he rounded a bend, he saw it. A small glow danced in the distance, flickering in a way no natural phenomenon could replicate. It was fire, impossibly alive in the cold, dusty canyon. Ethan froze. He had not seen real fire since the disaster. In the colony, everything burned in controlled mechanical ways, machines heated to sustain life, reactors humming. But this was pure, elemental, alive. Cautiously he approached. The glow grew brighter, revealing the source. A woman sitting cross-legged on the canyon floor. She was human, unmistakably, yet there was a presence about her that made her feel like she belonged both to this world and another. She was tending to a small contained fire, which seemed to dance and shimmer even as the wind tried to snuff it out. She turned her head slightly, her eyes reflecting the orange light. They were deep and calm, the color of dusk itself. Her hair, dark and long, fell loosely over her shoulders. She wore a suit adapted to the harsh Martian environment, but it was adorned with patterns that reminded Ethan of something ancient, something deeply human yet untouched by the sterile technology around them. Ethan wanted to speak. To ask her name, to ask how she was alive. But words caught in his throat. For the first time since the fire that had destroyed his family, he felt a strange sensation. Something like hope, mixed with fear. The woman smiled faintly, not out of recognition, but as if acknowledging the silent grief that clung to him like a shadow. She gestured toward the fire, inviting him to sit. Ethan hesitated, then obeyed, lowering himself onto the rocky ground a few feet away. The warmth from the fire seeped into him, melting a fraction of the cold that had settled in his bones. For a long time, neither spoke. The canyon walls echoed the soft crackle of flames and the distant howl of Martian wind. Ethan watched the woman, trying to read her, to understand why she was here and what she wanted. She moved with a grace that was deliberate and calm, as if every gesture was a meditation. Her silence was not empty. It was full of meaning, of patience, of something Ethan had forgotten existed. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was low, steady, and strangely comforting. "You are lost," she said. It was not a question, nor a judgment, simply a statement. Ethan wanted to argue, to deny, but he could not. I don't know what I am anymore," he admitted. His voice was rough, cracked from disuse. "Everything I loved, it's gone. The colony, the people, my family, gone." The woman nodded as if she understood perfectly. She reached into her satchel and produced a small device, placing it beside the fire. It hummed softly, a tiny generator maintaining the fire's intensity. "Fire brings warmth," she said, "and warmth brings life. Even here, on this red world, it is enough to remind us that we are still human." Ethan stared at the flame, then back at her. "Who are you?" he asked finally. She tilted her head slightly. "A friend," she said. "A traveler. A keeper of stories and fire. You may call me Nayeli." The name felt strange on his tongue, yet somehow familiar. There was no sense of threat in her presence, only an odd mixture of strength, wisdom, and quiet power. Ethan had been alone for so long that even the simplest human connection seemed miraculous. He asked her how she survived, and Nayeli simply smiled, showing him small, clever devices she had created to filter water, generate energy, and protect against the harsh Martian storms. Her methods were a mixture of ancient knowledge and new technology, a combination that made sense only to someone who truly understood balance. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, the canyon became a dark, silent expanse. Yet within the circle of fire, there was warmth, light, and a strange sense of grace. Ethan felt his chest unclench slightly, the tight knot of grief loosening just enough for him to breathe without pain. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to hope. Not for miracles, not for the impossible return of what he had lost, but for the possibility that life could continue, that humans could survive, that he might survive. And perhaps, if he was brave, he could learn to carry his grief not as a burden, but as a memory that guided him forward. Nayeli did not speak much more that night. Instead, she tended the fire, arranged the devices, and moved with quiet purpose. Ethan watched, absorbing the rhythm, the calm, and the strange beauty of her presence. She was a reminder that even on a world of red dust and despair, human grace could still exist. When sleep finally claimed him, it was deep and dreamless, a rare reprieve from the constant ache of loss. And for the first time since the fire that had taken everything, he allowed himself to imagine a future in which he was not alone, a future in which hope might return, carried on the flames of a fire, in the silence of a canyon, guided by a woman who seemed almost like a gift from the universe itself. He did not know if the signal that had drawn him here was truly human, or if it was a trick of the mind. But he did know one thing. He was no longer completely alone. And in the cold, barren world of Mars, that was enough, for now, to bring warmth to a heart that had been frozen for too long. The next morning, Mars was colder than Ethan remembered. The canyon walls reflected the weak light of the sun, turning the dust into a shimmering haze of orange and copper. Ethan woke to the small warmth of Nayeli's fire. Its steady glow had a strange, calming effect, and for the first time in weeks he felt that the oppressive loneliness that clung to him had loosened, if only slightly. Nayeli stirred beside the fire, her movements calm and deliberate. She had slept lightly, but her presence was like a silent shield, holding back the cold and the vast emptiness of the canyon. Ethan observed her carefully, noting the patterns stitched into her suit, the clever devices she had arranged around the fire, and the way her eyes seemed to understand things without words. "You survived alone?" Ethan asked finally, his voice rough from disuse. Nayeli looked at him, her eyes soft but steady. "Not alone," she said. "I carry the fire, the knowledge, and the memory of those who came before. They guide me." Ethan frowned. "But why in this canyon?" Her smile was faint. "Because the world needs fire, even in silence. Because someone must remember that humans can survive, even when all seems lost." Ethan swallowed. He had not realized how much he had missed human interaction until that moment. The simple exchange of words, the presence of someone who understood survival on this red, lifeless world. He wanted to ask more, to know her story, but he felt the weight of his own grief pressing down. Nayeli seemed to understand without being told. She gestured to a small device near the fire, a water filtration system she had built using solar energy and Martian soil. "We must take care of what we have," she said. "Even in silence, even in grief, life must continue." Ethan nodded slowly. He knew she was right. Survival was not just about the body, it was about spirit, about refusing to surrender completely. For months he had been drifting, mechanically performing tasks for the colony, letting despair fill every empty space in his heart. But here, with the warmth of the fire and the calm presence of Nayeli, he felt a spark of life rekindling within him. They ate a small meal of rehydrated rations in silence. The fire crackled between them, casting long shadows on the canyon walls. Ethan watched the way Nayeli moved, arranging supplies, checking her devices, and tending the fire with care. She had an effortless grace, a rhythm that seemed almost ceremonial, yet entirely practical. Every motion was intentional, every glance measured. "Can you teach me?" Ethan asked hesitantly, breaking the quiet. "Teach me how to survive like this?" Nayeli paused, looking at him with steady eyes. "Survival is not only about the body," she said. "It is about balance. You must learn to carry your grief without letting it crush you. You must respect the land, the fire, and yourself. Only then can you help others." Her words struck Ethan deeply. He had been carrying his grief like a stone, letting it sink him further into despair. Perhaps he could learn to carry it differently, to let it guide him instead of control him. Over the next few hours, Nayeli taught him. She showed him how to extract clean water from the sparse ice deposits hidden under the dust. She explained how to construct small windbreaks from rocks and the canyon's natural contours. She demonstrated how to maintain a fire in the shifting Martian winds, using a combination of chemical reactions and controlled oxygen flow. Ethan absorbed everything, fumbling at first but gradually growing more competent. He realized that Nayeli's methods were not just practical, they were a philosophy. Fire was more than warmth, it was life. Silence was more than absence, it was reflection. Grace was more than beauty, it was strength expressed quietly. As the sun climbed higher, the canyon became a harsh landscape of heat and shadows. Dust devils spun across the red plains, and the wind threatened to snuff out their fire several times. Ethan struggled, but Nayeli's calm guidance helped him stay focused. Each success, each small victory felt like a triumph over the emptiness he had carried for so long. When they paused for a brief rest, Ethan finally allowed himself to speak more openly. He told her about the colony, the fire that had destroyed his family, and the months he had spent wandering through grief. Nayeli listened, never interrupting, never judging. Her presence was a balm, her silence a permission to feel, to confront the pain without being overwhelmed by it. "You've been carrying a heavy burden," Nayeli said softly. "But even the heaviest burden can become a guide if you carry it wisely. Fire teaches us that. The fire burns, but it also illuminates. It warms, but it also consumes if we do not respect it." Ethan nodded, the weight in his chest easing slightly. He realized that Nayeli's fire was more than literal. It was symbolic. She had brought warmth, yes, but also clarity, patience, and hope. For the first time since the loss of his family, he felt the possibility of grace, of being more than a man defined by grief. As the day wore on, they began to explore the canyon together. Nayeli pointed out hidden ice pockets, natural wind tunnels that could shelter them from storms, and the best vantage points for observing the horizon. Ethan noticed the way she moved, attuned to every shift in the environment, every sound and shadow. He had always relied on technology to survive, but she taught him to rely on observation, intuition, and respect for the land. At one point they came across a narrow crevice filled with frost. Nayeli knelt and demonstrated how to extract water without disturbing the fragile ice structure. Ethan tried to imitate her, fumbling at first, but she guided his hands gently. The moment felt almost sacred, a lesson not just in survival, but in patience, care, and connection to the planet. When night fell, the canyon became a sea of shadows. Dust swirled like smoke, and the temperature plummeted. Ethan huddled closer to the fire, feeling its warmth seep into his bones. He realized that he had begun to trust Nayeli, not just in practical matters, but in the quiet knowledge that she would not let him fail. Her presence was a lifeline in a world that had threatened to crush him entirely. They shared another silent meal, this time warmed by the fire and flavored with a newfound sense of companionship. Ethan found himself speaking more freely, not just about grief, but about dreams he had long suppressed, plans to restore parts of the colony, ideas for improving survival, even fleeting thoughts about hope for future generations. Nayeli listened, nodded, and offered insights, blending her ancient knowledge with practical advice. "You are learning," she said at one point, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Not only how to survive, but how to carry yourself in a world that can feel empty. Fire, silence, grace, they are tools, and you are beginning to wield them." Ethan felt a surge of gratitude tinged with humility. He had come to the canyon seeking the signal, a sign of life, and found something far greater. Nayeli's presence, her fire, her calm wisdom, it was a guide back to humanity itself. As they settled in for the night, Ethan allowed himself to look at the Martian sky without fear. The stars were sharp, cold points of light, but they no longer reminded him solely of loss. Instead, they seemed like markers, guiding him toward a path he could follow, one step at a time alongside Nayeli and the small fire that symbolized resilience. He thought about the colony, isolated and silent, filled with survivors weighed down by grief. Perhaps, he realized, he could return, bringing with him the lessons he had learned. Fire could rekindle not only warmth but hope. Silence could teach reflection, patience, and observation. And grace. Grace could remind humans of the strength that existed quietly within themselves. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future where he was not defined by loss, where he could be part of rebuilding, healing, and guiding others.